Hello and welcome to the CIB Intelligence Report, the show that brings you the latest developments in the Chanticleer Intelligence Brief, the pre-professional applied analysis group that is supported by the Department of Politics at Coastal Carolina University. I'm Dr. Joseph Fitzanakis, the CIB's faculty mentor, and we're coming to you today from the studio facilities at the Edwards College of Humanities and Fine Arts here at CCU. In our earlier shows, we featured interviews with some of the important student figures in the CIB's history, including the group's founder, Ben Malone, and with experts on topics such as North Korea's nuclear program, the Islamist militancy in Nigeria, as well as the drug cartels in Mexico. We have with us today two analysts. First, we have Connor Lewis, a senior who's originally from Northern Virginia, who is the recipient of the CIB's Analysis Award. That means that he scored the highest grade this semester in a series of oral intelligence briefs in the CIB's Applied Intelligence Analysis class. We also have with us today Clara Kaminsky, who is from Georgia, specializing in strategic intelligence in Africa's Sahel region. Her main focus has been the growth and capabilities of extremist groups in what is arguably Africa's most dangerous and unstable region. And they're going to talk to us, both of them, about their specific expertise and what is happening in that topic as we speak. We're going to start with Connor. Connor, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Now, what do you believe? Your focus right now is the two important countries, Russia and China, but your concentration is not so much American relations with these countries, but how these two countries relate to each other.
Exactly.
So my question is, what do you believe is the current status of their relationship?
So right now, Russia and China resemble a strategic partnership. They're short of an alliance. The reason I say this is because there's a lot of formal mutual suspicions between the two, and they also both they're partners of consequence. So right now there's a lot of things going on in the world, and the world's polarity is going towards multipolarity. So when the world is in multipolarity, means the United States' power is waning, because during the latter half of the 20th century, the world was bipolar, which was the Soviet Union and the United States. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, then the world became unipolar. Now what we're seeing in the 21st century for the first time virtually since the end of the Second World War, is the world is becoming more multipolar with the rise of nations like Russia. Well, not so much Russia, but India, Brazil, South Africa, and especially China, with their economies growing.
The so-called BRIC countries.
So-called BRICS, exactly. So right now, the current status of Russian and Chinese relations has a lot to do with their relationship with the United States, because the United States, of course, wants to keep its relative hegemony over the world. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so Russia and China are incentivized to work together, not only because they're close geographically, but both of them have kind of similar ideologies. They're not Western countries, and they have similar views and norms regarding human rights and their domestic politics within the countries. So Russia and China both look at each other as partners of consequence at a time when tensions with the United States and both countries seem to be rising.
It's time to turn to Clara, because I think her topic, which is Africa's Sahel region, encompasses the Sahel, which is the most volatile region in the most volatile continent of the world. Not to mention, of course, that at least in Connor's case, most Americans know, of course, of the importance of China and Russia. In the case of Clara, I would actually argue that most Americans don't even know what the Sahel means. So when you say the Sahel, Clara, what do you actually refer to?
The Sahel refers to the basically 1.5 million square mile landmass between sub-Saharan and the savannas of Africa.
And so to to sort of visualize this, how big is this region?
You could fit all of Europe in the Sahel.
Oh,
you could fit most of the Middle East in the Sahel, most of the U.S. in the Sahel, not all together.
Yeah,
but
right. So that's how big it is. So some of the countries that are encompass.
some of the countries, mainly the ones I focus on, are Burkina Faso, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Chad, and parts of Nigeria.
All of these, or most of these, were former French, am I right?
Yes.
French
Yes.
colonies up until the second part of the 20th century. Yes. Now, the reason that you're looking at the Sahel is because it's a very unstable region currently. All kinds of issues ranging from humanitarian crisis, economic collapse, and of course militancy. Historically, how do we get to this point where the Sahel is such a volatile and unpredictable territory?
The main reason that it is so volatile and unpredictable is because it's so largely unmonitored. The Sahel has historically been a terrorist safe haven, an extremist safe haven, because the governments there are also weak. They do not have the resources, they do not have the manpower to monitor these areas, and a majority of that 1.5 million square miles is just vast desert. There's not a ton of civilization. Cities are compact and close together, so there's just so much open area for these extremists to train, recruit, to just operate unknown. And the humanitarian crisis in the region is also helping the influence of these extremist groups, because so many people are going hungry every day, especially around the Lake Chad basin, Lake Chad has shrunk exponentially in the past couple of years. And so many people are going hungry every day. People are going without water, without power, without basic resources, and the government cannot provide these resources. So these groups are stepping in to kind of support the community. And so along with stepping in to act as the government and not having a government, there are also all these jihadi fighters who are being pushed out of the Middle East right now, and they're just coming straight down through northern Africa and into the Sahel to these unmonitored regions.
I know that you guys don't make policy as analysts, you just advise those who do. But if, in an odd way, you had a chance to really implement America's policy in regards to your topics, what would be the one thing you would do overnight? Connor, what about you?
So if I had to do one thing that I think is really important, right now Russia and China have a communication outlet between Vladimir Putin's secretary of, his chief of staff, which is, well, the equivalent to a chief of staff what we have here. His name is Anton Vano. And the name of the Chinese minister that has this, is the same kind of role with Xi Jinping. His name escapes me, but right now they kind of have a bilateral communication mechanism, which both countries don't have any sort of communication system of that level with any other country. Now, I'm not saying the U.S. needs to send the new secretary or chief of staff or chief of staff Kelly to, talk to Xi Jinping and Putin in Moscow and Beijing, but I think one important thing is to increase or at least recognize the importance of communication with these two, not only in a tripartite fashion, but also in a bilateral fashion between the U.S. and China and the U.S. and Russia, because this would make it much easier to see the intentions, at least, what intentions that we're being not opaque about, and it would kind of make a lot of these, it would make the opportunity for a lot of these tensions that may not need to be so tense and high in areas like economics and especially military confrontations be much easier for the United States to say, hey, we're going to do this naval exercise, whether it's in the South China Sea or close. Beijing can say, well, if you're going to do that, we're going to braise your naval warships. Same thing goes in Eastern Europe. If you're going to do this exercise in the Baltics, and it may be close to Kaliningrad, the Russians can say, well, if you do this, this is how we're going to act. So at least there's not this randomness. So that's what I would say is increase cooperation, or at least recognize the importance of having open cooperation with both these countries.
Right. And then increase predictability somehow through that.
Well, that's
the ultimate goal,
hence
right?
that's what
you would love that.
Yeah, exactly, from an intelligence perspective, yeah.
And Clara, let's say you were somehow appointed as Department of State Undersecretary for African Affairs, and you focused on the Sahel. What would be the one thing that you think should be done right away?
Well, that's a really hard question for this area specifically. Because there's very minimal U.S. policy in the region already, so there's not really much to build off of. And B, you're in this tricky situation where it's a terrorist safe haven, so you have to be very careful about what you do because there's already reliance and support for this group. I think the most effective strategy for the United States right now would be to shift their focus militarily to a more humanitarian side of it, because AFRICOM's strategy right now is to solve African problems with African solutions, and that's kind of onto something. But we go completely against that when we are militarily involved. So finding a way to support the communities, whether it be through their governments or through humanitarian aid, possible solution right now is to be, because of the Lake Chad Basin, so many agriculturally based families are being displaced. So finding a way to change the agriculture in the area, find a new thing to produce or a new way to harvest, a new way to do those crops. Or right now, the U.S. is one of the main big countries that doesn't have a stake in the Sahel right now. Like both Russia and China are kind of putting their claims on the area because in the years to come, manufacturing, production, everything is going to be moving to Africa just because of the manpower that's going to be there. The population is rising, whereas in Southeast Asia, where manufacturing is, that population is declining. So these factories and everything are going to start moving. So maybe spearheading that issue and starting to put our plants there first and being able to support communities.
Fewer boots on the ground, less military involvement, and more industrialization, more humanitarian aid, more diplomats in the area.
Yes, it just has to be long term, because we can't just go with mission groups and hand out food, because A, these people aren't going to take that because they have this reliance on these groups, and that puts them in a dangerous situation, and B, that will sustain you for a day. We need to start implementing policies that will be able to sustain this region for years and years, and that's how we'll be able to turn it around.
Yeah, well, let's hope we have a chance to implement that as Undersecretary of State for African Affairs. A lot of things to think about from both you guys, what you said. This brings us to the end of our program. I want to thank our guests, CIB analysts Connor Lewis and Clara Comiskey, for their timely and very much up-to-date and insight on their respective topics of research. For more about the CIB, please visit our website, www.cibrief.org, or our social media pages, which you can find on our website. This is Dr. Joseph Fitzanakis with the CIB Intelligence Report. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.